Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Quiet in the Halls, episode 3. If you've not seen already, Mr. George, the podcast is out. It was really good. We did really well on the reels. I believe 10K views on one of the first reels. So really good improvement, really exciting. If you haven't catch into it, we talked about God, what it was like for him to grow up, and many other things. So please watch it. But today we have Mr. Mooney, also ex-theology teacher, now a resource teacher here at Catholic Central. I'm very excited to have him on, and we're going to talk about very good topics.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate the opportunity. This kind of stuff's really fun.
So I asked my guests 2 questions.
Okay.
One of them being very easy. Why did you decide to come on my podcast?
So I, number one, am pretty extroverted. So like the opportunity to sit and just have a conversation to me is always a good thing. You know, I think that like people asking questions and you know, getting to play off of one another is something that we don't get enough of nowadays. You know, like I hate to be that old guy that's like, oh, there's so much technology, but like the art of just conversation is so important in life. And so the opportunity to just sit and talk for however long it takes is like not something that I would pass up, especially if it like was doing you a solid for something you're doing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that like, it's fun. First, like that's my best answer. It's fun.
Nice. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, of course.
It's great. So for my first question is why did you, so like first off, like what was your upbringing like? And then how'd you become a teacher?
Great question. So had you told me growing up in the Northville public school system that I would be A, a teacher, and B, teaching in a Catholic school, and C, of all places, teaching at Catholic Central, like I probably would have, it's not just that I would have laughed at you, like I probably would have thought you needed to be checked out, because like I grew up in a family that was like very business centered and was very like focused on, you know, that sort of 9 to 5, clock in, clock out. Like, you know, my dad was an accountant, my mom was in sales. And so I felt like I had a head for numbers and just figured I was going to follow in my dad's footsteps. And I started in accounting in college and just like, that was what I was going to do. But I was really blessed to find some great mentors along the way who kind of nudged me to sort of listen a little more. I also wasn't really raised super religious. And so the idea of like following a calling wasn't something that was resonating with me as I was growing up. But over time, I kind of got the bug, and I knew that I was always that cousin at the family parties. It was like, well, you know, the all the little kids are here. Let's give them to Matt. Mm-hmm. And so I would just be the one in the pool missing dinner because I was playing with the kids, or I would be the one, like, I was just like around kids all the time. And so I had some really good mentors who sort of said like, hey, you know, you'd probably be pretty good at this. And instead of doing what I thought I was supposed to do, I really started thinking about, well, what do I actually want to do? And that's what got me into teaching. And then I joined the church in 2008 as a convert. And my first position was in a Catholic school. And so my first couple of years, I was joining the church and I was starting to teach. And I knew that school had sort of a lot of turnover in the theology department. And I went to the principal and said, look, maybe I'm not the best teacher in the building, but like I care about this stuff. And I'd be happy to teach theology if we feel like that would be an asset. Yeah. And so I ended up doing that for like 10, 11 years. And I loved every second of it.
Nice. That's super good. For a theology teacher, to like learning. So like Mr. George, for example, we had him on the other podcast I just mentioned. He was in the can't speak, missionary.
Yep.
To become a priest. Yep. However, what are the steps to become a theology teacher?
Great question.
What's the
Super
protocol?
Good. So it's kind of the Wild West a little bit, because when you talk about teacher certification and being highly qualified and going through and getting your teaching certificate, it doesn't align perfectly with the like state methods. So my primary teaching certification wasn't in theology, but I had taken, just as a part of my upbringing and a part of my time in college, like I had a wild ride in college, not because I was a wild person in college. I was actually pretty boring, but I took a lot of classes, and I took a lot of classes in the religions of the world, comparative classes, you know, Hinduism classes, Buddhism classes, like just stuff that I was like fascinated by. I've always been fascinated by people and culture, and I always want to know, you know, it's like just about people. And so when I talked to the principal at the time and said like, you know, how would I go about doing this? I ended up taking just a boatload of classes at the seminary. And there are some degree programs at certain universities that will kind of grant you like a de facto teaching certificate, but that's not the same as like having a state of Michigan teaching certificate. So I do have a teaching certificate through the state of Michigan, but I also have taken a number of classes to get certification through the Sacred Heart Major Seminary. And that's just how I did it. And so it's more than catechism classes, you know, but also I had a background that had a lot of religious studies in it. So the principal was like, well, you definitely are qualified to do this. So I was like, oh, well, great. Plus I had all the experience of the conversion too. So like there were so many things that were going well for me at the time that it just kind of worked out. But you can get a teaching certificate from um, a school to teach high school theology. It's just not always what happens. A lot of times you get teachers who go back and try to get certification versus like theologians who then get a teaching certificate. So it's kind of interesting to figure out from a hiring standpoint, like who do you look for?
Mhm.
Like, do you want a teacher who then later comes to the faith, or do you want someone who's deeply embedded in the faith but maybe has to figure out teaching methods?
Yeah.
So I was the teacher who then brought the faith to the classroom versus being a
Nice.
theologian.
What type of theology did you teach?
Great question. A lot. But my bread and butter was morality and world religions. Those were the two that were my passions, and I would say the things that I was best at, and was probably arguably like sought out from students. Like those were the classes that they knew that when it was time to take those classes, like um, not that I was like highly sought after, but I think there were a lot of students who like were hoping that they would have that class because they'd heard, because I did it for so long and I had some really weird projects that people would look forward to.
Mhm.
But those were my two that were like, to this day, like I love talking about that stuff.
Where did you teach originally?
So I started at Divine Child High School out in Dearborn.
Okay.
And so that was where I spent the bulk of my time. I also was an assistant principal there for a few years as well before making the jump over here.
So you said your family wasn't particularly religious, and you talked about your dad wanting to be accounting. Like, so, like,
Mhm.
what was your family life like? Was it like a really close family kit, or was it more of like, this is the expectation?
It's a good question. So my brother and sister are not like crazily older than me, but they're significantly older than me. And so it was kind of like the first generation of kids and then me, at least is how the sort of distance was in the family. So I had a lot of leeway in terms of like I was like a free range kid. Like I would, like summer break would come around. I'd wake up whenever and I would just like leave the house, and like I had a bunch of friends in the neighborhood and we would just like do stuff all day. And so the reins, it wasn't that there wasn't an expectation on me, because there certainly was. But it wasn't like I was, a chip off the old block or like following my old man's footsteps, or like I really had the opportunity to kind of plot my own course, which is like enviable, I think sometimes, but is also really tricky when you're trying to find your way. And like, I had so much freedom that sometimes the like very specific guidance that I think some kids get, I didn't really have. So I literally just kind of like figured things out. Like I learned a lot by just doing, and I learned a lot by like making mistakes and getting hurt and like all
Yeah.
kinds of stuff. But it's made me like, pretty emboldened to like be willing to try things, and so like I think that I always say, I have some very close people in my life who have like taken chances on themselves, like whether it's going into business for themselves or like they're pursuing their passions or like they're in the arts or something like that. That's one of those things that I've really tried to channel in learning, that is like, hey, you need to go for it. And so for me to kind of break from what was a loose expectation that like, well, you're just going to kind of do like what we do, and do something totally different in my family. And I'm only one of the first few people in either side of my family to like get a college degree. And so that was, they were not really understanding of like the motivation for it, but they were still happy for me that I was finding my way, which was kind of nice.
Yeah. One thing, you move the mic a little bit farther or closer to you.
Closer.
So you said college was a wild ride, not because you were doing anything bad, but what do you mean by wild?
So as I said, I didn't. I know people who would sit down with their parents or even like their guidance counselor in college and like really carefully craft what classes they were going to take and like the minimal amount of classes they were going to take. And I just sort of like tried to figure it out. And I ended up, I started at Michigan State. And then after a couple of years, I knew that was both from an environmental standpoint and from like a program of study standpoint, it wasn't what I wanted. And so I transferred. But this was like all on the strength of my own will. And so there were a number of things that like I didn't know what to do. So I transferred, and many of my transfer credits came in as electives. So I have so many undergraduate credits that just transferred in as electives. So I took so many classes in trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life that I had a very big buffet platter of experiences and learning experiences that it was like most people that I've known have tried to keep it very tight, like I want to graduate in 4 years, I want to be done. And mine was just like a very meandery path through college, but it led me to really value to like learning, really learning what I found enjoyable and how I would take those experiences and try to make them relatable to students that I had, because I knew when I had the most fun in a classroom, I was learning the most too. It wasn't just that we were playing games and that the professor was asleep in the back and we could do whatever we wanted. No, like I found people who were passionate about what they taught, and I learned the most from those people. And there's still some of these crazy lessons that I still remember from those teachers. And so that really instilled in me how I wanted to hopefully be as a teacher. And I don't know if I accomplished it or not, but I certainly try.
Yeah, nice. This kind of gets to one of my questions is, if you had a magic wand, like what's one thing you could switch about the school system?
Oh man, there's a lot.
Could be public or private.
I think one of the things that I wish that we could do, and I guess this maybe answers this question, is I wish that there were more of an emphasis on being able to see the range that a student can achieve in their learning and how they display that learning. I think that I understand the necessity for tests and high stakes testing and things of that nature, your ACTs and your SATs and your AP tests and your midterms and your finals. I understand all of that. But I also think that portfolio assessment is kind of a lost art. And I think that the ability to show what you know across a range of tasks is more indicative of your ability to work in the world and to be successful in the world than like just the moment of, I went into, a high school in Ypsilanti when I was 18 years old and I took the basic skills test for whatever, I get that tests matter and I get that we live in a high stakes world, but I also think that showing a range of skill matters a lot. And so I think if you could do that, I think if you had like a midterm exam and a portfolio that you submitted at the end of a class to say like, okay, yeah, I took my test, but this is what I can do. Mm-hmm. I think that gives a much better representation of who that person is as a learner. And I think that it also touches on the things that we do in our space and the IAP program of like, intelligence isn't one thing. Intelligence is many things. And I think being able to display that multiple different ways would help us to better understand learning and learners and what like functional intelligence is versus just like, well, what did I get on a test?
Oh, when you mean by like portfolio, like you said, like vastly, like what would that test exactly?
So for example, let's say you're in English class, right? Okay. You're going to take the grammar test. You're going to have vocabulary, right? But I also think that having writing samples and a range of things that show what am I actually assessing you on in grammar? Okay, like you can identify this, that, or the other, which is a great skill, an important skill. But what about your writing? How do you display knowledge of that in writing precisely, in your word choice, in your syntax? Well, to me, having a range of things that show, okay, whether or not I identified the adverb clause in this particular passage, if I write with style and proficiency and I show that I can effectively use an adverb clause, then I do know that. But maybe the one test didn't show it, but the other sample did. And I think that there are a number of tasks that you can do in school and we have amazing teachers in this building, and we have really creative people, and we have people who are willing to put in time, effort, and energy to make sure that their students are successful. But I also think that we don't have systems in most schools that facilitate the time it takes to grade that kind of an assessment. And we don't have the space to store these things. Like there's so many limitations. So I guess my magic wand would be to create some of those resources to make that more possible, because I think that there are students who walk through school thinking that they're not smart. Mm. And I think that it's depending on the way that you measure it, right? If I'm measuring the ability of, a fish to get from this location to that location, and they're not in water, like, well, they're never going to get there. And it's not that they can't get there. It's that they are not in the right environment to do that. And I think we could adjust some of those things and make things a little easier for people, not to dumb it down and not to modify the curriculum, but to allow them the space to learn and grow in a way that shows what they can do. And I think that sometimes we don't get to do that in like traditional schooling.
I like that. I like that answer a lot. For classroom settings specifically, do you think, specifically more in college, more of you see this versus high school, but do you think, and it depends on the learner also, but do you think people in big 300 like seminar classes have a better chance of learning versus like maybe a class that's 25?
So for me, no. And it had nothing to do with how quote unquote intelligence that was. And it had everything to do with accountability. The reason that I switched universities was largely because I needed to be somewhere where I would be a known commodity, and the professor would know who I was, and they would, because like the worst experiences that I've had from my own fault, but the worst educational experiences I had was when I was allowed to hide, when I could hide my gifts, when I could hide my weaknesses. If I could disengage, then, and that was this is all my own, on my own recognizance, my own mistakes. But one of the things that I've tried to do in my career is to know my students enough to be able to say like, hey, I see you. And I see what you're doing, and I see what you're capable of. And more importantly, I see where you're not doing what you're capable of. And so I had a difficult time personally because I don't think I'm super distractible, and I don't think that I had so many things that were keeping me from learning, other than the fact that like it was easy for me to just like sit and not listen and sit and not do the work, because like who could care? That person down there has no idea who I am. And I think that it's, for many people, maybe not all, if I feel as though that person is invested in me, oh my gosh, man, I'll go to the ends of the earth for you. Like there's like, and that's, if you expect something from me and you believe that I can do it and you're looking to see what I can do, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to try so much harder. So I personally don't love the lecture hall style. I get why we do it sometimes, and I get the efficiency of it, but I don't necessarily know that efficiency and education are always perfectly aligned. I get why we need to sometimes, but they're not, I don't think they always fit great. So I like the curated personal experience, tailored experience, I would say, not curated.
Yeah, one of the biggest reasons I started this podcast was so the student body here could get to know their teachers more. So I think I said this on the other podcast. I said I really like teachers, but I also one of their biggest critics. So I was like, you see them a lot throughout the whole day, and there's a study, I forgot exactly who did it, but it was like you see your parents for 30 minutes a day on average, and you're getting influenced by other people, and I believe primarily the school and teachers. So like I think that you perfectly just described it. Like you want to get to know your teachers, and if they put the most effort in, then the students will put their best effort in, and you can have the best learning system possible.
And I think the joke, has long been that like, people don't get into the field for the money, like haha. And the truth is like there's some truth to that. Like people get into education because they care about the content, and they care about the imparting the content to other people. And I sometimes, to my own detriment, like I want you to be successful. Like I don't need an award. I want you to win an award. I want to see you I want this podcast to be big because I want it to reflect on you.
Thank you.
I don't care if it's because I was on it. I just want you to be successful. And I know that there are some people who would say, well, like I should want some things for me too. And like, okay, that's fair. I get that. But I think that many teachers are wired in that way, where it's like, we do this because we want the next generation to be better off. And I want you to, and I take very, very seriously in our space, in the IAP program, we see a number of alums who come through and they say like, gosh, I really wish we would have had a program like this when I was coming to Catholic Central. And I always say, that's part of the reason why we take this so seriously, because we know that there are a lot of guys who came through here and they struggled and they could have used the help and it wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure that that does not happen to anyone again. And so that's, to put words in Mr. Leslie's mouth, like that is really why we work so hard to do this for the guys here. And like, why when people come in, like if they need help, doesn't matter who they are, we're going to do our best. We're going to figure it out.
Well, one question I've asked Mr. Gismondi, and I'll ask you, like, how does teaching, like, because teaching is amazing, you just described it, but it also gets monotonous and boring because you're teaching the same subject over and over again. And so teachers are humans just like us. I think a lot of students forget that. And so how does like teaching the same thing over and over again not become boring? Mr. Gismondi described it. He used humor and says he tries to use that, but how do you do that?
I think that's really, I would love to believe that someone somewhere thinks that I have a good sense of humor. And I do think that there is some truth to that I tried to do as well. I was really blessed in when I taught morality and world religions, that morality, I feel like if you're not interested in teaching that, like you don't have a pulse as a teacher. Like this stuff's big. Like, and I've had every conceivable conversation with a high school student, I think, based on that class in a co-ed high school. Like I've talked about it all, and I've gotten a lot right. I've gotten a lot wrong. I've found some things that I had no idea on and I had to come back to. And I was thankfully, like, the students are gracious when you say, like, honestly, I really need to think about that because I'm not sure I know the answer to that. And so I think that I have worked to be very sincere in my career and to provide students with a version of myself that's very open and that says, like, hey, I do not have all the answers, but I really am curious in what you are curious about too. And I'd love to find those answers with you. And that leads us to any number of conversations in every conceivable walk of life. And so I've found, weird projects, and I've found, things that sometimes I'll come up with an assignment that, like, only you are going to find interesting, but somehow you got it. And then when you got it, other people kind of started to get it too. And some of the things I did that were the best were things that I just was like, you know what? I feel like I would have found this interesting. I guess I'll try it. And then it turns out that it was like the best class I'd ever run. Whereas when there are things that I was doing that I thought was like, I'm supposed to do this, right? Those are the things that fall flat because I wasn't being authentic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, being authentic made all the difference. When I show my level of interest in something, then the students realize, like, I actually care about it. Because there's a lot of content, to your point, there's a lot of content teachers teach that they don't care about. And they're like, I just got to get through the curriculum. It is what it is. And you guys know when we don't particularly love teaching about something, and there'll be, peaks and valleys in a given class. And so it's just that level of, like, this is really what I love. This is really what I care about. I think more than anything, helped me to find things that were fresh. But I was also very blessed in teaching content that was very topical. Anytime you're talking about morality, I can pull from any news item of any day and find 17 different things to talk about. And so to me, the flexibility to be able to say, like, hey, there was a law that was passed yesterday. We should probably talk about that. Like, you just brought one up the other day about taxing on gambling.
Yeah.
I could have taken that in that minute
Mm-hmm.
and run an entire class on it with no prep because I knew the content well enough. And I genuinely find things like that interesting. And so, like, you just figure it out. And when you've been teaching long enough, I think you recognize that today's lesson plan is not what matters. What matters is, like, do you get it in the long run? And so that, the fact that I really cared about what I was teaching, really, I think, and it was so authentic about it, is the thing that I have done that has kind of kept me going.
Nice. For new teachers and maybe teachers who don't even go to CC who might see this, like, what would you say to them to, like, you kind of described it a little bit about being authentic and stuff, but, like, what are, like, 3 simple things they can do to make their classroom better? Because not even just for me, I want everyone to have a great learning experience.
I think they need to cut themselves some slack, because I think when you come out, many teachers come out of the gates and they are just, like, on fire, and they just, like, and sometimes this is in younger grades, the grade school grades in particular, but, like, the classroom has to be perfect. Every lesson has to be perfect. They have to say everything perfect. And the truth is, like, teaching's messy. And, like, there are going to be days that you look in the mirror after a lesson and you're like, that was terrible. That was so bad. And, like, you need to be able to shake it off, because you know what? Next period, if you're in high school, you got to teach that same lesson again. You got to figure it out. And so I think giving yourself the grace to be like, hey, I'm not going to be perfect, is a great place to start. You should have high expectations for yourself, but you should be willing to cut yourself some slack. I think that you should lean into the things that you find interesting and fun, because kids want to know you. And as much as I think that we might believe that we're in an age where, like, oh, kids don't care anymore, and, like, they're so disaffected and they care about their phones. Like, kids do care about their teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they do. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've never had a kid see me in public and avoid me, because that definitely has happened. But it's pretty rare. Even kids that I thought really didn't like me will approach me in public and say hi. And, like, they don't have to do that, And so I think that it's not just grade school kids that like, want to know their teachers. Like, letting yourself be known in your classroom and what you care about matters so much, because we are a community. And this is a field that, as much as we want to talk about AI and replacement and this and that, and maybe there's a conversation for that someday, like, this is a very human industry. And as human beings, we do want to get to know each other. So that would probably be the second thing that I would say would be, like let yourself be known. And then lastly, I would say to never stop learning to do new things. We can't stand in front of the classroom and try to teach students new content and be unwilling to continue to learn ourselves, because like that's what we're all about. Continuous growth and progress is like the name of the game. And I learned this, it's like my grandfather was 102 when he passed away. And he like caddied until he was like in his 80s, and he would walk. He wasn't on. It wasn't like he was using golf carts. And so just the idea of like never stop trying has always really resonated with me because of him. And so I God willing, I have good genes, and I'm gonna get to live a good long life. And like I want to be that guy that doesn't stop, and like doesn't have to be an expert at everything, but like is not ever willing to just be like, well, I know enough. And I think if we can model that for our students, then when we ask them to try for us and they see that we're willing to try too, that kind of fits in some of the other things, right? Because they see the authentic you and they're getting to know you because you're trying to. That's the other thing I said. But then also, you're not going to be perfect. And so they're going to see that you need to give yourself grace too. And so all of those things I think work together for new teachers to prevent the teacher burnout, which is really, really real for new teachers. Like many teachers don't make it 5 years and then they leave the field. Like they never teach again. So
I didn't know that. There's I think the school system's so interesting because the way it's taught, like I've done so much research on it, and like I was really, really like for a while, just like any kid, I never liked learning. Never really was really. I always liked learning. I always like deep thinking, like morality, like topic issues, like government. Like I was always good at that. Very much history, but I'm talking about like how the school system actually functions. And I'm a still very big critic of it. Like I was talking to one of my friends. I was like, I'm so robotic to school, where they can sound the bell and I'll automatically just stand up. And I was like, I've been so programmed to think about that. And I was like, is that a way that school should be ran? And so it's very interesting. Like same thing. I know people who are homeschooled and they're like, I can never think of asking a teacher to go to the bathroom. They're like, why should I do that? Like I should just go if I have to. And so it's very interesting, and it's very cool. It's cool to think about. But what would you say to someone like that who would say like the school system is ran inefficiently and the way that it's taught is like almost you're being trained like a rat?
So I see that argument to some degree. I think that when we talk about skill acquisition, there's a lot of different things that go into that. School is so many things, beyond learning content. You're learning social cues and norms. You're learning how to coexist with peers. You're learning how to work for a boss, so to speak. You're in a situation that is tightly controlled. It's a time in your life when you are, especially in high school, there are not a lot of times in your life that you need to be able to produce 80 to 90% mastery on 6 or 7 different things all at the same time. I really shouldn't have said that. All at the same time, right? Like think about the work world. Most people don't have to do the same. Now, I'm not saying it's easier to be in the work world, but when you think about what you have to do as a high school student today, I don't know that that is fully representative of like life, quote unquote. But I do think it prepares you well for work. And that to me is the fascinating thing about high school and then college and then work. High school, I almost feel sometimes prepares you better to go to work, because many students go from high school, which is very tightly regimented, rigorous, and they go to college. And then it's like, maybe they don't have classes on Friday. Maybe they don't have class till 12 o'clock on Tuesday and Thursday. Maybe they took one online. Maybe there's nobody watching them. Maybe they're cutting loose a little bit. And then they go back to the work world and it's like, oh, 9 to 5 again. Oh, you only get so many days off. Oh, you only get so many bathroom breaks. And it's like, whoa, wait, what? What just happened? Did I just go back to high school? And so the rat race analogy, like it's representative of what work can be for many people. And so high school, I will always say, this is where you learn how to do hard work. You learn how to push. You learn how to do things you don't want to do. You learn how to work for someone that you've never worked for before. And so from that perspective, I don't think there's a lot that I would change. And I think here in particular, we do a really good job of giving people some flexibility while still having some uniformity and some rigidity in the right areas. But there's also growth opportunities, and there's also opportunities for you to be listened to and for you to be able to start your own podcast. Like this building, I think this building does an excellent job of maintaining that professional standard while also fostering opportunities for growth that I don't think you find in most schools.
I completely agree. I think that a lot of students do need to work hard. Like I've always been taught, my dad, I was like, why am I going to school? It's to work hard, to teach you how to learn, to teach you how to work. And I think everyone needs to have a good work ethic. However, I look at it and say, okay, well, a lot of these people are like in debt. They have student loans, and then they apply for a mortgage and they're more in debt. And a lot of people have like, they're miserable. And I see, and I look back, and I look up, or I'm so young, I look at myself and say, okay, like I'm not trying to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so and like, as you said, it's literally the rat race. It's just like, I don't know if it's like a way that society should be structured. I think there can be a lot of improvements, and especially what we learn. I think a lot of it, at least not here at CC, but I've gone to every public school, charter, private, like every school imaginable. And I can tell you all the same thing. Like there's a lot of subjects that you'll learn that are like, you don't need to learn, like straight up, like a coloring assignment for math. Like you don't really need to learn that. Like it's a waste of an hour. Like time's limited on Earth, unfortunately.
Well, so that to me is a different question. The question of should our society be organized this way? Boy, that's a whole other ball of wax. That one, I could talk for hours on that one.
Yeah. But you kind of just described it a little bit of like, you go to high school, it's very rigorous, it's very structured. Then you go to college, it's a little bit loose, but then it's back to the 9 to 5. And so I don't know if it's healthy. I would have to come back to you a little bit on that.
The order of that is tough, but I would say if we lived in a world that was a bit less materialistic, I feel as though we would have a bit more freedom to pursue things in a way that was healthier. But because we have such an emphasis on things, in order to have the things, you need to have money. In order to have money, you need to have a quote unquote good job. And I don't begrudge anyone the right to do whatever they want and to buy whatever they want. But if you order a society around your value is tied to the things you own, you are going to have the society that we have today. Like, I just don't think there's a way around it.
Okay.
But if you shift that focus into the quality of the people and into the community that we craft, I think there are opportunities to make changes that may be significant.
Nice. So my next question is, and you talked about it a little bit, do you think AI is harmful or helpful?
Yes. It's like anything else, right? I think if I hand you a hammer, there are a lot of wonderful, useful things you can do with a hammer. There's also a lot of really terrible things you can do with a hammer. And so I think in the end, it really ultimately deals with like, what do you do with it? Because we've been using these kinds of AI tools for much longer than since we knew about ChatGPT. So like to suggest that like there is a person out there who has never benefited from AI in the slightest ever. It's like, I think you probably did and didn't realize it, But then if you're using AI to do the work that you claim is your work, that to me is right, the sticking point that I have, right? The arts would be a good example. AI generated artwork to me is a placeholder. It's something that gets created and it's something that might even be useful. But to me, it doesn't replace like the arts. AI generated music to me doesn't replace the arts. A film created by AI, because like I value the creative process that like a person has to ideate and I've been able to see this process unfold, and I see how much time, effort, and energy and love and care goes into this kind of work. So using AI in certain ways, I would argue like that to me personally, I would not support. But if there's a component of efficiency, like Google LM is a great example or Google Notebook, excuse me. If I feed it a certain text and then I'm able to converse with the AI to work through understanding a text better, that's very different than like me going to ChatGPT and being like, hey, like I have an essay on this paper on this, book that I was supposed to read that I didn't read generate me a 10-page paper, complete with citations in APA format, right? All of those things. So like, if you use things responsibly, then I think they're great, and I think that they can be useful and wonderful, and we should pursue that. Unfortunately, I'm not fully convinced that most people are using AI in a way that is, like, strictly speaking, necessary and useful and efficient. And usually it's more like, well, I just didn't really want to do the work, so I didn't do the work.
Do you think you said the arts, honestly, well, if we look at Coca-Cola, I don't know if you saw, Coca-Cola had an ad and it was fully AI. And so I'm honestly pro AI because I use it a lot for work.
Sure.
And I also think it's I think it's part of the future. I just think if you read all the books, even like Cyberpunk City, it's like it's fully AI. And so I just think there's no stopping it in the sense that it just is what it is. The train is going and it won't stop for a while. Whether it's a bubble or not depends on what you think. I don't think it'll be a bubble. However, you talked about a little bit, how about the school system of using AI? I know when I came to CC, and this is why I want to talk about it, like when I was at a public school, they're like, you cannot use AI. If we find a hint of AI, like automatic fail. And I came to CC in orientation. They're like, use ChatGPT. They're like, it's a great tool. You should use it. And I was like, oh, perfect. I was like, I won't really have to worry about it as much.
So that, I think, again, it depends on like, how am I using the hammer, right? So, and I do think that there is a component of what we're currently doing with AI that, you're right, is probably going to be around a long time and is probably mostly harmless. Like I would say that there are a number of algorithmic things that we do anyway. So like the AI we've already been living with, like I'm not going to sit here and complain about, right? To me, it's the generative AI that is used to produce work that's not your own is the danger. So if you're going to use ChatGPT, if you come into our classroom and you're working on your economics study guide, we might say, yeah, go to ChatGPT and see if you can make yourself a practice quiz. I think that's a perfectly acceptable use of an AI because it's taking tools that you already have, it's repurposing them, and it's doing something useful to you in a way that you are not. There's no ethical issues from a copyright or use standpoint. All you're doing is seeking to broaden and deepen your knowledge on content. Nothing wrong with that. But if you have an essay from Mrs. Jones and you are to write about, so for example, I used to use a film called The Way that I really love. And there are 4 main characters in the story. And my writing prompt was like, each of the characters portrays one of the 7 capital sins. For each character, indicate which capital sin you believe they embody, provide examples from the film. So if someone goes to ChatGPT and says, here's the prompt, write the essay, that to me is a problematic use of anything, right? Because it's anytime they say that something's my work and it's not my work, then that's a problem. And so when the stakes are low in high school and it's like, well, I got a 0 because I got caught. Okay, that's fine. But if high school is where you learn how to do hard work and you've learned to do work by not doing work, that becomes a character issue that can propagate and expand in the future. And so to me, making sure that we can isolate like what's appropriate, good use of AI and what is, or any tool of any kind, right? The internet alone is a great example of like a tool that could be good, could be really bad. Right? The deep web, the dark web is a problem sometimes, right? Whereas like Google might not be, whatever. So I think it always goes back to like, what is it you're using it for? Why are you using it? If you're using it this way, is there a reason that another way wouldn't be more effective? And so for your work, perhaps it's incredibly useful and efficient and it just helps you do your job better, in which case there's probably I would, have no issue with it. But if someone were to be creating content exclusively using AI, that to me is where I'm like, well, that feels hollow to me. And it takes someone who is a creative person like you, and to me, like the thing that makes you is your ability to elevate the work and to ideate and create something special. If you outsource that exclusively to another tool, I don't know that is still you at that point.
Yeah, I guess it depends. Honestly, I kind of feel bad for artists because like it takes masterpiece like Van Gogh, Picasso, Grieb. I don't know if it's sorry. We might cut a little part of this out. But Van Gogh, Picasso, great artwork. However, I don't know if you can replace like physical paintings, like stuff like that, like in churches. However, digital stuff like NFTs, let's say like
Sure.
someone's into crypto, they're
Sure.
like, why would I pay someone, a graphic designer, $7,000
Sure.
to make me NFT coins, or I can just generate it on Grok for a lot less.
Yep. And that becomes, this is the great question surrounding the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who is very pro the arts and the creative process and intellectual property, I love and care deeply for people who are involved in the arts. And some of the people who are the most important people in my entire life are involved in the arts. And I would never cheapen the work that they do by doing that. I think that one of the things that we can talk about generationally, right, is that like older generations almost always look down their nose at younger generations. They're like, oh, kids these days.
Yeah.
And to me, it has nothing to do with the character of the generation, and it has everything to do with the access to the technology and the access to a world that is smaller than ever. And to me, this is the great challenge, right? If I were a kid now, no matter how I grew up, however long ago, the access to all of this is the thing that would be my challenge right now, my cross to bear, my burden. What am I going to do with all of this? And so coming from a time before now and seeing all of this, to me, it has made it easier for me to be more supportive of people who are creative and say like, no, I feel like there is a value in intellectual property. There is a value in the creative process. There is a value in all of that. And something that can be done cheaply does not have to be bad. But for me, there is a level of, like, I guess for lack of a better term, of like soullessness that comes along with some of that, that like having watched people create masterpieces, to your point, I just don't see the same level of value as carried out across, but that's, I'm sure someday the level of AI creation, right, because of efficiency, because of the tools, right, the singularity is coming, right? Like, hopefully not, but like that's something people talk about.
Yeah, I guess for me, as I said earlier, Coca-Cola making ads, and I think some other companies did. I just think that like a lot of jobs are going to be replaced because of it, and so I kind of want to tell people, be like, this is the future. Like, I would say that they need to start teaching classes on how to use AI. I think that we need to be like pro AI. Elon Musk, a great example. He was anti AI so much to the point where AI was just becoming a thing.
Mm-hmm.
He was just like, we got to go full throttle now. Like he goes, we have to be the masters of it. I think it's a good servant, but a bad master. But
I think that's a really good. That's a good turn of phrase. I think that's a good approach. I think there's some truth to that understanding how to use it matters. But I also think that we need to be able to be proficient in a world where there is no AI, because those skills can't be lost. And if we lose those skills, that to me is a significant black mark on the history of our species if we decide that we outsource some of that, And so there should always be the ability. I don't want to be conversant in a language I don't understand.
Agreed. So one of my next topics is you talked about teaching. This is a great question. This was cool because I was just listening to, I was in the IAP Center. I overheard this. So I had to ask this other question. What was it like to teach Aiden Hutchinson?
Good question. So I had some fun experiences with Aiden. So formerly taught at Divine Child High School. And so I taught both of his sisters and I taught Aiden. And it's funny. People are people, there was never a time that I felt like, and I've been blessed to teach a couple of students who've gone on to some pretty big stuff, for professional athletes, things like that. And I would put him in a similar class to like an Eric Haas, who I also taught, who played for the Tigers.
Wow.
Just good guys, people who expected high level expectation for themselves, worked hard, were kind, were goofballs when it was time to be goofballs, were serious when it was time to be serious, were respectful, came in, did the work. There was never a time, and there, I would say that for Aiden in particular, like it wasn't I don't think it's unfair to say that, it wasn't like he came in 8th grade and everybody's like, that kid's playing on Sunday for sure.
Hmm.
I don't think that it was that way. And there were people certainly along the way who began to say like, "Ooh, that's a special player," right? Same thing with Eric Haas. Same idea. Like you knew when he made varsity baseball as a freshman, you're like, okay, wow, that's big. This is a big program, and he's a freshman making varsity. Aiden similarly, like he's coming up through the ranks, and people are starting to talk about him. They never big timed you. They never, it was never like that. And so, um, it was it's always cool to see, right? What did I tell you earlier today? I want to see you be successful, right?
Hmm.
And so to me, I, I don't feel I had a share in any of his success. I don't feel like I am more than a blip on his radar, but I'm really proud that he has found the success that he has wanted. And he's done it in a way that I think keeps him true to the man that I believe he wanted to be. And that makes me really happy and really proud.
Nice. That's sick. Not a lot of people can say they taught an NFL player and an MLB star. That's really cool.
Yeah, so it's funny because like, I'll get like my mom will text me be like, "Did you see that?" I'm like, "Yes, I did, Mom. Thank you."
Yeah. So you mentioned that your dad wanted you to go to accounting, or maybe that was the path that you're going to choose. Who were the mentors along the way that kind of deferred you, and like what kind of life aspects or views did they really instill in you that really made you change?
Wow, there's a lot. And it's funny because some of them happened when I was young. I had teachers at a young age who engaged our ridiculous curiosity. There's a story that I'll share off mic that comes to mind that was just like the height of lunacy. But we had a teacher that like was willing to sit and talk with us about this like really ridiculous question when we were seniors in high school. It had to do with cellular regeneration. I'll say that. But we were just like sitting around talking, and then like we just started talking to this teacher about like, hey, what if? And instead of being like, you guys are idiots, which like maybe we would have deserved, um, this teacher was like willing to sit with us and be like, well, let's really think about it and let's really talk about it. Cause like she was like, I don't really know the full answer, but like I'm genuinely curious. And sometimes those moments as a teacher continue to shape me now. It's not always the people that I had when I was growing up. Sometimes it's the people that I met since then. We talk a lot about the adults and the teachers that shaped us. But as teachers, we don't often talk about the students that shaped us, and there are definitely those people. So Miss Papler was her name. She was big. I had a guy named Mr. Medier. He was a science teacher that taught me in a class called Opposing Viewpoints in Science, and it was just about all the politics of these big issues in science, and that kind of became a blueprint for me to model some of my morality class, which is great. Um, Probably my biggest um, uh, hero from an educational standpoint was my mother-in-law. She was a social worker and a school counselor and a principal, and she was like, sh I don't know that anyone who will watch this will have known her, but she did a lot within the archdiocese, and she believed in me in a way that no one ever believed in me, and helped me to see that I could do more um, for the church and for God and for the people in Southeast Michigan than I ever would have dreamed that I could have done. And I try to live up to that every single day. Um, and so once I got into the field and kind of got moving, I've been very blessed to have a couple of students who also were great. I was yearbook advisor at Divine Child, and I had a former student whose name was Wayne, and he just was like just a fountain of energy and care, and he passed away during his senior year, and I carry his memory with me a lot because um, I was just starting to really get to feel like I could be a teacher, because I don't know if every teacher goes through this, but I definitely hit the times of like, man, I don't know if I can do this. Like I want it, but like this is tough. And so getting to know him and work with him really became like a very big part of my life. And his passing hit me very hard. Uh, and I kind of kept that with me, like to care, but also to like kind of have like a little bit of professional distance, to like understand that like, okay, this like, the people that shape you, life is fragile, and like you don't know when things are going to happen. I also had another former student whose name is Lauren, who graduated a few years ago who similarly like you you pause, certain times in life when you meet with students or colleagues or mentors, and you just go like, okay, these people are impactful. And this was another student who was actually helped me to think a little bit more about the art side of things. She's in art school right now, and we talk a little bit about the arts and the nature of art and the nature of creativity and the nature of like. So like for me, teaching has been such an enriching experience when it comes to just getting to know people. Right? There's people in our school right now that I'll take with me forever. Like I'm someone who really I like to catalog my former students by graduating year. And
Mhm.
so it's like really it's nice. So whether it's you or it's any, it's Zavin or Bobby or like, Blake or whoever, right? Like the guys, like I really try to keep you guys with me because it's not just about how I grew up. I want to keep growing
Mhm.
and I'm going to learn from you. And there are things that you have said and done that I will take with me, and your influence on me will carry me into the years in the future. And so whether it's the students I mentioned or the old, the people from my past or even the present, like all of that I think about all the time.
Mhm. That's really impactful. I think a lot of students, if they heard that about their teacher, that like you as I think what a lot of kids and just even being a kid, I don't think a lot of them understand that they do have influence on people. And so they might in their friend groups, they might understand it, but like towards adults, they're like, oh, they're set in their way. And so like they have a job, a family, whatever. But you guys are influenced by us, and that, yeah, I never thought of that
It's
that way. But
I the first time I ever said that was at the wake for Wayne, and I think about it maybe not every day, but I think about it a lot. That like it's disingenuous of me to ask you during your like most formative years to like really give me your all and have me not do the same because
mhm.
like it's not me modeling what relationship is and what goodness is. Goodness, discipline, knowledge, right?
Yeah.
That reciprocity is a part of that, I think.
So my next question is: your family didn't grow up religious. Kind of 2 3 part question. I put it all in one.
That's okay.
How did you get introduced to Jesus? And what led you to Catholicism? And then what do you think is best about Christianity?
Okay, great. So my brother sort of fell into a group of of friends who attended a local Methodist church, First United Methodist, 8 Mile and Taft, and I was the younger brother by a lot, and so like I just kind of like eventually started to go because he went, and there's a part of that church that like God lives for me still, because it was like where my first like interaction of just like you grow up and you know who Jesus is, right? Like, and my dad grew up Catholic, but was kind of a lapsed Catholic. My mom grew up in a household where there was some lapsed religion, so it was like the idea of Jesus was like around, but like not really terribly present. And so I was confirmed into the Methodist church just as kind of like what you do, Um, and really, it wasn't until I was coming into adulthood when I was like very clearly looking for meaning. I had transferred schools, and I was academically interested in religion, and I had found these faiths that like weren't really a great fit for me, but like were interesting. There's elements of Buddhism that I think gel really well with Christianity. And so like from what I did know and like the questions that I had, I was like, well, this is okay. So like, emphasis on detachment from earthly goods, and okay, I can get that, and like the philosophy and the headiness of it. And like, I don't think that I'm any great philosopher, but I do like have a brain that boy, does it never shut off sometimes. So I think about this stuff a lot. And so that opportunity, um, sort of just continued to gel and to galvanize with me. I told you my mother-in-law was a big influence on me, and so it just sort of led me sort of drawn into the fold of the church. And so one of the things I love the most about our faith is that um, number one, it's a faith that's built around goodness, and I think that that's so important. The deliberate choice to be good, not to just avoid the bad stuff. If you leave the faith in the Old Testament, uh, there's so many you shall nots, and like you shouldn't do those things, obviously. But Jesus also said, like, also pursue goodness. So don't do the bad things, but also actively choose good. And that message to me is so important because I think so many times the idea is that we're living to avoid hell and we're not living to go to heaven.
Hmm.
And I think that difference matters a lot. in how you conduct yourself, in how you interact with one another, your ability to forgive, your ability to bear wrongs patiently. Like, it's not just about don't be mean. It's about no, be kind, gentle, be compassionate, be patient. And I'm certainly not great at all of those things, but we have a model to look to for all of those things. And those are things that in the end, that's how I want to be treated. So like, shouldn't I try to do that too? And so that's one of the things that I think is maybe not unique to the Catholic Church, but our model is certainly unique. Our the top of the mountain, right? We're never going to meet where Jesus is in this life, but we can absolutely keep striving. And I love that we're never done. We're always going to continue to try to work to be the men and women that he wants us to be. And that charge is a sacred charge in my life, and I do my best to do it. And when I stumble, I try to get right back up and get back on the horse and do it again.
Nice. That's a very good way to look at the world. The golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So more back to school. That was really impactful. You're coming to Christ. That was really cool. This is interesting because you and I have a little animosity towards this. But what do you think of the new phone rule? I personally don't like it.
So it's like anything else. Like, I think many students are walking around with their MacBooks, right? And then they get bent out of shape that they can't have their phone. Like, first of all, the number of times that I have to come around and Command Q someone's phone app off of their computer, like I know what you're doing. Like, you have a device. You have a device that's tied to the internet, that's tied to your Apple Music and to your Spotify and to your phone. And like, I understand where people want to have the level of connection to their phone because you're not used to being disconnected. I totally do. But at the end of the day, like, you have so many ways to be connected that aren't your phone. And the challenges that come along with having phones during testing sessions and classroom sessions and in the bathroom. Like, why do you need your phone on you in the bathroom? Who needs to be like have
Angry
access?
Birds?
But who needs to have access to like a camera and recording in the bathroom? Like, just leave that in your bag, put it in your locker. Like, I completely, and having been a school administrator, having dealt with police, having dealt with things that come along with the level of connection that people can have regarding their phones and schools and whatnot. It's not that deep, man. Just put it away. Like, you don't, at the end of the day, like, you don't need it 24/7. It's okay. Put it away for a little bit.
My perspective on it is I completely agree with you, like literally everything. However, I think the part where I don't like is, luckily I don't have to, but like, I don't think the underclassmen like that you have to put in a signed like locker. I think that's very like restrictive and very controlling. And I think that there's some part of like, I don't know what the like correct word would say, but I would say very like controlling and very like, okay, like, again, just as I said, more programming and more you can't be yourself or whatever, more restrictive.
I guess my response to that would be, if I said to you, don't do this, could I trust you and take you at your word that you wouldn't do it times 1,100 boys?
Probably not.
Probably not. Probably not, right? So at the end of the day, it's tough because when you create legislation that's uniform, there are going to be people who, if you just told me not to do something, I wouldn't do it. And so, yeah, maybe resentment is the wrong word, but am I like, do I really wish that like I wouldn't have to do this? Like, yeah, I get it. I totally get where like you might feel like you shouldn't have to do that. But if we're being honest, most people are not going to follow that rule. And if we're being really honest, if you were to look around at the pants pockets of many of the classmates of yours that walk through the halls that are not supposed to have their phones, I'm not going to say that no one has a phone on them.
Father.
so like,
be merciful.
Yeah, you need to have, there's a reason why you legislate. There's a reason why you create rules. There is a problem with cell phone usage in every building across the country. So how did we respond to that? We said, don't have your phones on you. There you go.
Yeah. But I like the phone pockets. I guess that was
Sure,
like,
that's fair.
I like that rule. I just think like having it like you cannot have it, like it had to be in like in a locker, I think was like, okay, that might be a little too far in my opinion. I like the idea of the phone pocket where like, the teachers say, okay, this is your attendance. And if you don't have your phone there, then we'll mark you absent or whatever. And so I like that idea to me was like, okay, it's restrictive, but there's still a little bit of freeway. And so if I'd encourage father or whoever is going to be the next person up, like I'd have it that way.
I would say if we didn't still see a lot of phones in the halls and a lot of young underclassmen still with their phones in their pockets, I might feel that same way. But as of right now, I would say like I get it. I get the policy why it is the way it is.
I do too.
So
I do too.
yeah.
For my next question is, so we talked about a little bit more about high school, and this was a more interesting, more a bigger debate, more cross-wide. Even a lot of politicians, talk about this. Is college still useful today?
I would say definitely yes, with a caveat. It just kind of depends on what you're going into, because I think that there are certain degree programs that are maybe not.
A lot of the successful people just in the world, like Elon Musk, like Mark Zuckerberg, a lot of people who are like up in the higher echelon of society never really completed a college.
Mhm.
And so I guess I kind of want to be a part of that. Like that money's a big motivator. Maybe sometimes not always the best motivator for me, but definitely a good motivator. It definitely helps me work hard. To me, I kind of look at them and say like, okay, is college 100% necessary? But I
Sure.
definitely do agree. My thought process on it is like the college is really only useful for medical students, lawyers, teachers, and psychiatrists. I think poetry, you'd have a better chance of, and maybe having one English teacher, like whatever. But I think if you're like doing something like poetry, like you could have more success out of it by just writing poetry, not actually sitting. My kind of analogy is like, if you watch 20 hours of basketball film versus played 20 hours of basketball, like you'd be better if you played 20 hours of basketball versus watching 20 hours of basketball film.
I think that there's some truth to that depending on but I also think that process matters, you know? So like if you watch the 20 hours of basketball, maybe you wouldn't be a better player, but you'd be a better coach. And so I think it depends on your motivation, depends on what you're interested in. So like, let's go back to the arts, right? Are there people who can find success as artists without going to college with an art degree? Yes. Is an art degree going to provide you a level of polish that will help you in your art career? Also, yes. And so I think that it will largely depend on the individual and their path. So there is not a degree that's going to make you a billionaire. There isn't, you know, and that's just how it goes, right? Those situations and the people in those individual situations, there's such a confluence of opportunity and skill and just frankly dumb luck that puts people in the rarefied air of the Mark Zuckerberg and of the Elon Musk and of the whomever, right? It's a trick of genetics. It's a trick of where you grew up. It's a trick of what your parents did. It's a trick of the need you have created, right? Very rarely do you find someone who is like a completely self-made individual who was like, I see this need. I created this. Did all the hustle. Like, no, a lot of times it's just like a ton of luck, you know? And so to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I don't think is necessarily like great when it comes to the is college useful conversation. It is useful. It is good. It is helpful, but not uniformly to all people. And so it's a great question of like, what do I need? How is it going to help me? How am I going to then give back to the community? Where am I best suited? Mm-hmm. And so like, maybe it isn't college for everybody. But like the idea that like college is not necessary, I would say I don't necessarily gel with in most cases, but in some and maybe even many cases, I get that.
Okay, cool. All right, 2 other questions because I know you got to run. I always ask this. So, do you think extraterrestrial life is real?
That's a good question. I don't know that intelligent extraterrestrial life is real, if that makes sense. Like sentient life outside of this planet. The size of the universe being what it is, the idea that there could be some degree of like microbes or like, you know, microscopic life somewhere, to me, like makes a kind of sense. But I don't know about like complex life forms capable of space travel, communication, sentient thought, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know that I would support that. But I also like the universe is a big place. So, so I guess I wouldn't be so narrow-minded as to say that there's like 0% chance, but like, it would look a lot different than us, right? A lot different than us. So yeah. I would say like a qualified maybe.
Okay. I always think it's a fun question. It's always interesting to hear different other people's opinions.
Sure.
So I always ask all my guests that question. And then my last question is, what piece of advice would you leave to leaving seniors?
That's a big one. I guess to me, the advice that the advice that I would want to give is advice that I was given for the first time, gosh, 4 years. And maybe it sounds silly to say to,
All right, hang on. Can you put it a little
Oh, yeah.
closer?
So the advice that I would give was first told to me about 4 years ago. And I'm someone who is pretty chronically hard on myself. Like I want to do well. I want to do right by people, and I want to make people proud, and I want to do what I'm supposed to do and like how I'm supposed to do it. Be gentle with yourself. I think that we are in a time and a place where we believe that we need to be rigid and we need to be hard and we need to be durable and we need to stand firm. And there's a lot of that that's true. But I think that we also need to have the grace to treat ourselves gently when we need it, because there's plenty of pain out there, and there's plenty of people who will dole it out intentionally or otherwise. And I think that having high expectations of yourself is good, and you should have that. But I also believe that it's okay for you to need space. It's okay for you to be calm. It's okay for you to just be gentle with yourself. And gentle doesn't mean weak, and it doesn't mean fragile, and it doesn't mean any of it just means like there are going to be times that you might need to manage your own headspace in a way that is safe for you, and don't be afraid to do that. I really do think that that's a lesson that has been hard for me to learn as someone who doesn't generally gravitate that way. But in the moments that I have heard that and thought about it and worked at it, it has helped me to find a good headspace in a prayerful way, in a professional way, in a social way. Right? It has allowed me to grow more than I ever did by trying to hold myself to an unattainable standard that was unfair to me and was probably not good for me. Right? I'm not saying to settle. I'm just saying hey, sometimes a gentle hand gets the job done.
Yeah, for just speaking of me, I try to be hard on myself just to motivate me. Also, you need good work ethic. Also, you have to show up every day. But yeah, I think often a lot of times people forget that grace aspect of themselves, and I think people just get so caught up in life and distracted by other things and trying to get that Lamborghini or whatever,
Yeah, sure.
that they kind of lose many years of their life. So I definitely do agree with that. And Mr. Mooney, thank you for coming on my podcast.
Love it, man. Anytime.
That wraps up season 3 or episode 3 of Quiet in the Halls. Thank you, Mr. Mooney.
You got it, bud. Oh. Alrighty.
Yeah. I didn't ask you. It's all good. They always run longer than I thought.